Hi guys, I'm Chloe and I'm from Eng Lang Pro. And today I'm going to be talking to you about how to interpret English language essay questions, specifically for Unit 3 4, so for your exam. Eng Lang Pro is an incredible company, and we have so many really, really helpful resources to help you with every single aspect of English language. Really, really helpful for 1 2s, but also like an absolute necessity for 3 4s. So feel free to check out the rest of our resources and our teaching. We do like classes. So definitely have a look at that for all of your English language needs. But today, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how I got a raw 50 study score in 2023, interpreted essay questions leading up to my exam. Given I know that the essay is a particularly tricky part of the exam, it's probably, I found it the most challenging sort of portion, and how it seems unpredictable. So this is sort of how you can, I suppose, make that essay the most predictable sort of thing, as predictable as you can, I suppose. So essentially, you're going to get given an essay topic, right? Well, you're going to get given a couple of essay topics. You have to be able to choose which one, right? So that's sort of based on your preference, and I'd be picking the one that you think suits your strengths best. But regardless, you're going to need 3 body paragraphs that fit any essay topic, basically. And so you think to yourself, like, okay, but how am I going to be able to come up with those on the spot? Like, how do I have like an essay prepared for every topic? So what I'd recommend, so essentially, if you have the right prepared topics, if you have a really broad range and really correct range of topics for Unit 3 and Unit 4, then you should be able to shuffle and mix those sort of topics based on the question that you're given. So like, doesn't matter what you gets thrown at you, you should be able to select from that list that you've pre-prepared with evidence and quotes and examples and everything, to put into your essay. You should not be having to make anything up on the spot or like design a paragraph you've never written before, because that's just going to lead to like flaws. So yeah, we want to be really predictable. So I'm going to go through what I did and some ways that I prepared for like the broad range of essay questions that you could get given. So these are the essay paragraphs here that I prepared to allow me to answer pretty much any topic thrown at me. So I was thinking to myself, I want to be as confident as I can. I want to also not spend a lot of like precious time, because it's so time pressured. I want to spend so limited time trying to decide what to pick. I want to look at the question and think of my list, which is, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of paragraphs, right? But it's not like ridiculous amount. Like, I've got 1 2 3 4 5 6 6-ish 7 for Unit 3, and only 5 for Unit 4. So I knew that doesn't matter what I was given on Unit 4, like a Unit 4 essay question, 3 of those 5 were going to fit in. Doesn't matter which ones I could pick from that list, but 3 of the 5 they were going to fit in. The good thing as well about preparing your Unit 3 and Unit 4, you could even mix them up. You could even pick 1 from Unit 3 and 2 from Unit 4 if the essay question sort of was a bit mixed in terms of what unit. So for Unit 3, I talked about politically correct language, doublespeak, and euphemisms, which are particularly, oriented towards formal language. And I have a video going through all of these Unit 3 essay topics and types of evidence you can use. And then for sort of informal language, I had dysphamisms or expletives, informal language used by Australians, which you'll note is quite similar to the colloquial Australian slang in Unit 4, so it probably would have been the same examples. That even cuts down another topic you've got to remember. And then jargon and slang, which could be combined into one paragraph should you need, or separated out into 2, just depending on what the question was asking of you. Then for Unit 4, teen speak, ethnolects, Aboriginal Australian English, standard and non-standard. So that is about the level of education that a person has, and then colloquial Australian slang. So you'll notice that all of those paragraphs they're about identity, right? They go through an aspect of a person's identity that's presented through their language. So whether you're a teenager, whether you have a different background, your education level, etc. So then what I did, and this was probably in the final month before my exam, I thought, okay, I need to be able to, adapt and overcome any essay question. How can I do that? So with sort of recommendations from my teachers, I went and I thought, okay, let's pretend I was doing every exam for the last 6 years, and they give you 3 topics, right? So I went and picked the topic that I thought, okay, which one would I choose if I was doing this exam? So pick your most preferable topic. And then of these, and you'll notice that they come up, of these as paragraphs, how would I apply it, and what would I think about the topic, I suppose. So since I did it in 2023, you'll notice that I started 2022, but obviously started 2024, or whatever year you happen to be watching this. So, and this is like genuinely, this is the notes that I've taken from my folder from that year. So this is exactly what I wrote at the time. So the first topic that I thought I'd be able to do that: at times, language can disrupt, deceive, and divide. Discuss when this is true in your contemporary Australian society, and refer to at least two subsystems. I just want to note that referring to at least two subsystems is mandatory. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to refer to every single subsystem, so don't get caught up on that. Like, refer to at least two is fine. It's just like a tick box, right? You're just trying to get that over and done with. So just sort of don't discard it, but you're almost going to naturally do that if you have picked the right examples in your paragraphs. And then when this is true in contemporary Australian society, all of your examples should be from contemporary Australian society. So that's not like, don't get caught up on that. And then discuss is kind of what you want to be focusing on there. That's like the task word. But mostly we're looking at this first portion. So at times, language can disrupt, deceive, and divide. So I looked at this and I thought, okay, this is like actually giving me a kind of clear guide on what to do here, and look out for this. There's 3 words. There's 3 paragraphs. So I'm going to take 1 paragraph for disrupt, 1 for deceive, and 1 for divide, I believe I did. So I thought to myself, okay, when does language disrupt? Expletives and dismissums, immediately going up to Unit 3 topic. So when people swear, it disrupts us, right? It like causes people to be disgruntled, offended, all of that sort of thing. So expletives can disrupt, and some politically correct language can also disrupt. So I've picked, sort of maybe one example that I thought might fit in there as well. And in some case, a lack of politically correct language can, or refusal to use it, can be disrespectful. So I think I've sort of merged the two. I've probably picked, I thought this example that I already prepared from that one and this example, they'll fit together nicely in one paragraph. But and then that just kind of increases like the complexity of what you're saying and the complexity of your argument. But essentially, I could have just done expletives and dismissums and said that disrupts, and that would be fine too. Then I've gone deceive. So doublespeak, almost the whole point of doublespeak is deception, right? It's trying to, I suppose, obfuscate and manipulate, so you think they're saying something they're not. So immediately that's deceiving. And then I would do just my regular doublespeak paragraph up here in Unit 3. And then the use of jargon and slang can exclude people that don't understand, therefore dividing society. So I looked at divide and said, okay, well, divide, exclude, right? Sort of bring people apart and put them in separate groups. So jargon and slang would be able to do that. And so I would have combined my jargon and slang paragraphs. I think Unit 3, I was actually almost more comfortable using Unit 3 paragraphs. So that's why I've picked this one. But I just really like how this was set out. So that made it easy for me. So after I did that, though, I thought to myself, okay, but like, what if I don't get given such a lovely topic? Because I thought that was a really nice topic. And I get given a question that I'm not as comfortable with. So then I picked another question from the same exam, which I recommend you do, just to put yourself in a situation that you get given a tricky question that you don't like. So this was one from the 2022 exam that I didn't really like as much. So the evolving nature of our language largely reflects the influence other cultures have on the way we communicate. So it's still pretty sensical, and I like to think that VCAR is trying to be kinder these days with how they phrase their topics. Like, they're not using really confusing words. This is pretty straightforward at the end of the day. It's just a Unit 4 topic. So our language largely reflects the influence other cultures have had on the way we communicate, and then the same sort of stuff. To what extent is this true? So mindful that to what extent is this true and discuss are different. They're asking for different things. So you need to respond to the question in a correct, like a more, it's a different way, right? So discuss, you're not really asserting your opinion. You're just saying this happens, but also this happens. Isn't that interesting? Look at everything that happens. You're just kind of like noticing things. To what extent is this true? You need to sort of make like an assertion. You need to make an opinion. You need to say, this is the extent. And usually like the extent will be like somewhat of a high or predominantly a low. It's never a set, completely high, completely low extent or whatever. But you do need to make some opinion, whereas in discuss, you don't need to make an opinion. Discuss when this is true. This is true then here, and it's not true here, and it's not about your opinion. But here, this is like you're putting a little bit more opinionated. That doesn't mean to say that you put your opinion into your examples, but just in reference to the topic. So the paragraphs I picked So the influence of First Nations Australian people is more widely brought into language. So they have developed Australian English, and sometimes, therefore, that can influence how we use language as well. So we're starting to say things like "nam." We start, saying, I don't know. It's not necessarily but so we start using more Aboriginal English because we hear Aboriginal English around us. So that's the influence of the Aboriginal culture on our language. Then I did an ethnolect paragraph, so the influence of immigrating cultures such as Greek. So Greek was the one I sort of based my ethnolect paragraph around. Contribute to the formation of ethnolects, which also are more present through young bilingual speakers, so people that are being taught languages while they're young, and additionally through borrowings that occur. So because we hear, it's the same sort of thing. We're saying that because we hear all of this, all these ethnolects around us, we pick them up into their own language. So we are saying this is true to some extent. This is true to some extent, both these paragraphs. The third paragraph is a little bit different. So the influence of the teenage culture has a large impact on the way people speak as teenage design slang circulates around and adults try to use it themselves. So here I've interpreted cultures as not specifically rigid in terms of language cultures, so backgrounds and races and things like that, but also a culture that we have amongst a group of people, such as teenagers. We have our own culture, right? There's middle-aged culture, and there's elderly culture. There's all sorts of cultures, and that's based on any aspect of your identity. So you could go up here and go, okay, well, there's also education level culture, if you want to say that. So it's just a slightly different sort of route, I suppose. And how that teenage culture does impact in the same way. It does reflect the influence other cultures have. But more specifically, it's about how the teenage culture influences how adults speak, and how adults try and sort of bring that into their own sort of dialect, I suppose. So I'd be saying to what extent is this true? It's a large extent, except I'd probably be going into to sort of challenge the topic a little bit, to what extent is this not true, I suppose, would be that it doesn't always reflect, I suppose, the accuracy of the people using it. So when adults are using, or accuracy that doesn't actually reflect the identity always of people using it. So when adults are using teenage cultural slang, that doesn't actually represent who they are as such, but it does show the influence other cultures have, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not an accurate representation of who they are. So that's how I'd sort of make my sort of I suppose counter argument, in how you sort of present the topic, because it's always good to have a counter argument. I wouldn't say, even though it looks like this, I'd find little niche ways to sort of disagree with the topic as well, just so that your whole topic isn't in agreement. So going down to 2021, the first thing I chose, so when interacting with others, we make deliberate language choices that reveal elements of our social and individual identities. This, the really important words here are deliberate language choices. So this is about conscious language choices. To what extent is this true? So if you were saying this is true to, a complete extent, then everyone would be making deliberate language choices that reveal their identities. And I'd also note the difference between social and individual identities and how you would need to discuss those separately, and identify those separately as well. So then this is true to the extent that teens make deliberate language choices through their slang. Saying slay is not something that comes subconsciously to me. It's an intentional thing, you know what I mean? And that reveals their own individual identity, but also very much their social identity, how I am in a bunch of teenagers. Then it's also true to the extent non-standard language versus standard language. So we've gone teen speak was the first one, then standard and standard, so the educational sort of level, deliberately used to exploit covert and overt norms. So people use standard or non-standard, specifically politicians, to intentionally sort of demonstrate their educational level. So I might intentionally use big smart words to demonstrate my high educational level. Or right now with you guys, I'm trying to sound intellectual, but also I'm intentionally using almost non-standard language so that I'm exploiting the norm that I'm like you and I'm with the same educational status as you. So being able to sort of change the standard and non-standard language to appear a certain way. And then untrue to the extent sometimes these language choices are not deliberate. So that's the sort of flip there. And when I think of language choices that come naturally to people, it would immediately be ethnolects or even Aboriginal English, but primarily ethnolects. If you think of people that are coming over from other countries and they're learning English, when they accidentally slip up and say something in their home language, that's not conscious. Like generally, that's a subconscious thing. So they can, whilst you can make those choices to like, I'm like I know a little bit of Greek. If I like chose to speak in a bit of Greek, that would be a choice, and that would be intentionally to show my individual identity. But someone that's an actual immigrant, their slip up, that's not like conscious, that's subconscious. So that's sort of where I figured that they wanted me to talk about there. And keep in mind as well that there's heaps of different topics you could choose. It's not like there's a set amount. This is not the only answer, essentially. There's like, you could literally write about so many things. Okay, going on to the second one for 2021, it's just language. Who cares if it's formal or informal, standard or non-standard? To what extent is this true in contemporary Australian society? So this is like a statement, right? So is this true? Who cares if it's formal or informal, standard or non-standard? So essentially what we're talking about here is like, whether it sort of matters, I suppose, as to what language we use, whether it, how it affects people. Because if it doesn't matter at all, whether we use standard or non-standard or formal or informal, then like, I suppose we'd be completely agreeing. So this is untrue to the extent that sometimes it's important to use language that intentionally doesn't offend. So they're talking about politically correct language there. So this is a unit, back to unit 3. Politically correct language is important. It matters, right? It matters on whether you offend people and don't offend people. So I'd honestly, the first thing I would do when I'm breaking these down is think to myself, like, if I need to put this into words that I understand. They use sort of bigger words. Put this into like lay people English, like teen slang, put it into whatever you want. When interacting with others, when I'm talking to other people, wrong one. We're going back down here, this one, sorry. It's just language. Who cares if it's formal or informal? Who cares what I say? Who cares if I'm offending people? Like, say it in other ways. Ask yourself questions to the topic. Do people care if what you're saying is formal or informal? Do people care if it's non-standard or standard? Put it into a question. So untrue to the extent sometimes it's important to use language that intentionally doesn't offend. So the use of politically correct language does matter. Same thing that it's untrue to the extent that sometimes the use of formal language is detrimental. People don't understand. And so I would say that is about doublespeak, right? Like, does it matter if we use doublespeak? Well, yeah, it does, because sometimes people get confused. They don't understand what's going on, and it can be like manipulative, right? So does it matter? Yeah, it does. But then in contrast, when does it not matter? Both informal and formal language is usually comprehensible, and slang in Australia also has clarity because so many people sort of understand a lot of slang. So I'd probably talk about Australian slang there, informal language used by Australians. In like most contexts, the use of, for example, saying like Maccas, right? That's slang. But does it matter that it's informal? No, it doesn't, because like it's so widespread. That most people understand it is kind of what I'm talking about there. And also you can kind of talk about that slang, actually has benefits as well. So in that case, it doesn't really matter. So then I went through and did this with 2020. So I've got 2 there for 2020. Feel free to pause on them if you'd like to use these. And then I also did 2019 and 2018. So go through and feel so free to pause on them. I would recommend, like, this doesn't take long. One of these plans, once you have, mind you, the first thing you need to do is have these prepared. You need to have your evidence and have them prepared. Feel so free to use these exact ones. Once you've got them, these should take, 5 minutes to think, all right, what does this mean? Let me put it into a question. Let me put it into a statement that I understand. What does this mean to me? And how does this fit with the topics that I've already got prepared? How can I slot them in? What can I say about them? Because they will fit. And that's the thing that I want you to know, is that if you prepare these topics, or you prepare similar topics, or ones that your teacher recommends, like, they're going to fit with with the questions that you're proposed. You're not going to get a question that's asking you to talk about something that's not on the study design. The study design is limited, and your topics will fit with that study design. So spend like 5 minutes preparing this, right? And then from there, it's so much easier to start writing an essay. I did these when I felt like I couldn't sit down for like 2 hours, or really, you got to do it in like an hour and write a whole essay out. That's a lot of motivations, a lot of determination. And a lot of the time I did not feel like doing that. So I do one of these instead, and that's a good 10 minutes, or like 5 minutes. It's a good use of my time. And there's basically like endless exams out there for you to use. So you can just keep doing these. And then once you've done them all, then sit down and try and write essays based on those paragraphs. Letting you know now that I did not write an essay for every single one of these. That would be awesome, but I didn't have the like self-discipline to do that. But if as more essays you write, the better. You know what I mean? So absolutely have a crack at writing some based on my examples here, or go and interpret the VCAR exams yourself and have a go. And then from there, you can always go into the sort of like answers, I suppose, and look at what other students have done for some sort of see if your ideas were on track and if they'd fit with sort of like the marking guide. But yeah, I hope this has helped you sort of figure out what type of paragraphs you could put based on the essay question. And I hope that you have a better understanding of sort of how you can sort of dissect the essay question into like something that makes sense to you. Feel free to check out the rest of EngLang Pro's resources. Thank you so much.